December 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. Within 72 hours, the United States War Department confronts a logistics nightmare that will reshape modern warfare, not through revolutionary weapons or brilliant tactics, but through something German military planners considered laughable: prefabricated buildings. In Berlin, senior Wehrmacht officers reviewed intelligence reports about American military construction. The findings provoked dismissive laughter. Americans were erecting soldier housing using standardized wooden panels, mass-produced components, and unskilled labor. Barracks that looked identical from Maine to California. Mess halls assembled like children's toys. Entire military bases constructed in weeks rather than months. German military doctrine viewed this approach with contempt. For centuries, Prussian engineering excellence had defined military construction: permanent structures, reinforced concrete, precision craftsmanship. When Germany built fortifications like the Atlantic Wall, they poured 650,000 cubic yards of concrete with 15-foot thick walls. When they constructed submarine pens, they created monuments that would survive centuries. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The American approach seemed primitive by comparison: flimsy wooden structures, standardized plans, assembly line construction. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, one of Adolf Hitler's closest lieutenants, captured the prevailing German attitude perfectly when he publicly declared that Americans could only make refrigerators and razor blades. They would never produce the military equipment necessary to defeat German precision engineering. This wasn't merely propaganda. It reflected genuine German military philosophy: quality over quantity, engineering perfection over mass production. A single German Tiger tank, with its 88mm gun and nearly impenetrable armor, represented 18 months of skilled craftsmanship and precision manufacturing. American Sherman tanks, by contrast, rolled off assembly lines like automobiles. The German military establishment watched American construction efforts through this lens of superiority. Those prefabricated barracks? Temporary garbage that would collapse in the first serious storm. Those standardized designs? Evidence of American industrial laziness. That mass production mentality? Proof that Americans didn't understand real engineering. But in Washington, Brigadier General Eugene Raybould stood before crisis tables covered in deployment maps and construction timelines. His engineers had calculated an impossible equation. The United States needed housing for 16 million servicemen by 1944. Using traditional construction methods, building permanent barracks with skilled carpenters and months-long timelines, the war would end before half the troops had roofs over their heads. The American military faced a choice: build the right way, slowly, with permanent structures and proper craftsmanship, or build fast, using methods that would make German engineers cringe. The Army's Quartermaster General, working with the Corps of Engineers, established 5 principles that would guide American military construction: speed, simplicity, conservation of materials, flexibility, safety. Notice what's missing from that list: beauty, permanence, prestige. The Germans built to impress, Americans built to function. In 1928, the Quartermaster Corps had updated World War I cantonment drawings, creating what became known as the 700 series plans: simple wooden frame structures using inexpensive prefabricated materials that could be constructed in assembly line fashion. The designs sat unused for over a decade, until the desperate autumn of 1940. By October 1940, with German armies controlling most of Western Europe, the US Army began drafting hundreds of thousands of men. All of them needed housing immediately. The 700 series plans came off the shelf. Construction divisions drew up standard building packages that could meet the needs of a 125-man company. Barracks with central heating, interior showers, latrines, mess halls, recreation buildings, supply facilities. The standardization was total: over 300 different structure types, all using identical components. A barracks in Georgia used the same wall panels, roof trusses, and window frames as a barracks in Washington state. Factories could manufacture components by the thousands. ship them anywhere, and untrained soldiers could assemble them following illustrated instructions that required minimal reading ability. The typical 700 series barracks measured 4,720 square feet, with 2 floors designed to house 63 enlisted men and non-commissioned officers. Each soldier received a bunk, a footlocker, and a combination wall shelf/hanger unit. That's it. No privacy, no personal space. The arrangement wasn't just about saving space, it was psychological conditioning. Crowd soldiers into tight quarters, and they form the bonds essential for combat effectiveness. German military barracks, by contrast, featured individual or semi-private rooms, proper furniture, spaces that reflected military hierarchy and Prussian organizational principles. American barracks looked like what they were: temporary housing built for speed, not comfort. The construction timeline shocked everyone. Camp Edwards in Massachusetts became the test case. Between September and December 1940, 471 700 series buildings rose from empty land. The plans worked so well that copies went to 50 other developing military installations. Then came the 800 series, an improved version that fixed design flaws in the 700 series: better ventilation, stronger structural elements, more efficient layouts. By mid-1941, American military construction had achieved true mass production. Entire buildings erected in hours, complete military bases operational in weeks. The statistics become staggering. In fall 1939, the U.S. Army comprised only 200,000 enlisted soldiers. By 1944, the Army had built temporary military housing for approximately 6 million men. 6 million soldiers housed in structures erected faster than traditional construction could build housing for 6,000. Secretary of War Henry Stimson, in his 1941 annual report, described what had been accomplished. A housing program involving construction of over 40 veritable cities, qualified to receive populations running from a minimum of 10,000 to a maximum of over 60,000 inhabitants. Each contained all necessary utilities and conveniences, including recreation buildings, theatres, service clubs, chapels, athletic areas, hospitals, bakeries, laundries, and cold storage plants, all completed on schedule. And here's the detail that would have made German military planners recoil. These structures were explicitly designed as temporary, expected to last 5 to 20 years, then be discarded. The Wehrmacht built for permanence. Americans built to solve the immediate problem. Camp Campbell in Kentucky exemplified the American approach. Construction began February 6, 1942. 5 months later, 70% complete. The final accounting showed housing for 33,011 enlisted men, 1,736 officers, a 1,254-bed hospital, 116 company motor repair shops, 288,000 square feet of closed storage space, and 349,692 square feet of vehicle storage. Total construction time? Months. German military construction projects of comparable scale required years. The prefabrication philosophy extended beyond barracks. American military needed everything built quickly: airfields, warehouses, command centers, hospitals. The 700 and 800 series plans covered it all: standardized, prefabricated, assembled by whoever was available. Fort Des Moines, 4,700 square feet, 63 men, erected by workers who'd been farmers or factory hands weeks earlier. No architectural training required, just follow the illustrated manual. By 1943, 24,000 of these temporary buildings dotted American landscapes, from Alaska to Florida, from California to Maine, all virtually identical, all built using methods German engineers considered primitive. But the German laughter would stop when reality collided with ideology, when German soldiers, confident in their technical superiority, became prisoners of a nation they'd dismissed as industrial amateurs. The first great wave arrived in spring 1943. Veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps, elite desert fighters who'd finally been starved of supplies and forced to surrender en masse at Tunis, Tunisia. These weren't ordinary conscripts, they were dedicated professionals, many still believing Germany would win, who viewed their capture as temporary setback. They boarded American cargo ships at Oran and Casablanca, crammed into holds for the Atlantic crossing. Most expected harsh treatment, prisoner camps like those on the Eastern Front, minimal rations, brutal conditions. What they encountered instead would fundamentally challenge their understanding of American industrial capacity. The ships were Liberty ships, mass-produced American cargo vessels. Another German joke. The Allies couldn't build proper warships, so they welded together these crude boxes. Yet these crude boxes crossed submarine-infested waters, carrying 30,000 prisoners per month. The German prisoners arrived at ports in New York, New Jersey, Virginia. They boarded trains for the journey to prison. Camps, not cattle cars, comfortable Pullman passenger cars with upholstered seats, regular meals served during transport. German soldiers were accustomed to travelling in boxcars. Some prisoners insisted the trains must be driving in circles to make America look bigger than it actually was. They couldn't reconcile what they saw with what they'd been taught. America was supposed to be weak, soft, incapable of real industrial production. Yet here were thousands of comfortable rail cars transporting prisoners across distances that dwarfed Germany itself. The camps shocked them more. 425,000 German prisoners would eventually be held in 700 camps across the United States. Not concentration camps, prison camps, adhering to Geneva Convention requirements. 40 square feet per enlisted man, barracks comparable to American military housing, which meant those prefabricated 700 series structures Germans had mocked. Camp Hearn in Texas, Camp Concordia in Kansas, Fort Robinson in Nebraska, Camp Shelby in Mississippi, all built using the same standardized plans, all erected in weeks, all housing thousands of prisoners in conditions that many admitted were better than their living standards back home in Germany. Hans Weierke, a German POW at Fort Robinson, later stated that life in the camps was a vast improvement over cold water flats in Germany. The prisoners received the same food as American troops. Substantial meals, meat, fresh vegetables, bread, coffee, quantities that seemed impossible given that Germany was supposedly winning the war. The canteens proved even more disorienting. Prisoners could purchase items with their work wages, cigarettes, soda, ice cream, consumer goods that had been unavailable in Germany for years due to rationing. The Americans had these luxuries just sitting in prison camp canteens. German officers tried to maintain discipline by explaining this away as American propaganda. Temporary abundance, theatre designed to demoralize. But the evidence kept mounting in ways that couldn't be dismissed. The prisoners worked. Geneva Convention allowed it if they were paid. American farms faced severe labour shortages with millions of men overseas. German POWs filled the gap. They harvested wheat, picked cotton, worked in canneries, built roads. The American government paid farmers 45 cents per hour per labourer. The prisoners themselves received 80 cents per day. This created a bizarre economic reality. German soldiers, supposedly fighting a war against American capitalism, were now participating in American agricultural production, getting paid, using that money to buy consumer goods. One prisoner described the camps as a golden cage. But the real psychological shift occurred when prisoners saw American industrial production firsthand. When they rode trains past factories, when they worked near military bases, when they witnessed the scale of American construction and manufacturing. Kelly Holthus, who lived near a Nebraska camp, remembered 10 or 11 German prisoners working across the road from his farm in 1943. They stacked hay, worked sugar beet fields, did any chores. There was such a shortage of labour. Keith Buss recalled 4 POWs arriving at his family's Kansas farm. They built a concrete garage using just nail and string to line up the building. No level. It's still standing today, over 80 years later. The prisoners weren't just seeing American abundance, they were building it, with their own hands, using American materials, following American methods. The full scope of what they'd underestimated began crystallizing through accumulated observations. Those prefabricated barracks that German engineers had mocked. They were everywhere, not just in prison camps. Across the entire continental United States, at every military installation, housing millions of American soldiers. A German officer imprisoned at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, wrote in his diary about the impossibility of what he was seeing. America had built 40 separate cities in 2 years, each one capable of housing tens of thousands, all using the same standardized buildings that could be erected in hours. The mathematics became undeniable. If Americans could house 6 million soldiers using temporary structures built in weeks, what else could they produce at that scale? The answer arrived in the form of statistics that German military intelligence had either dismissed as propaganda or failed to grasp the implications of. By 1944, American factories were producing aircraft at rates that made German production look artisanal. Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan completed one B-24 Liberator bomber every hour. Every single hour. 24 aircraft per day. The entire facility had been constructed in 18 months using the same mass production philosophy as those prefabricated barracks, standardized components, assembly line methods. Workers who'd been making automobiles, suddenly making bombers. Chrysler's Detroit Arsenal tank plant in Warren, Michigan, produced half the tanks made in the United States. Not half of Detroit's tanks, half of all American tanks. The facility used automotive manufacturing techniques applied to military hardware. Germans built tanks like craftsmen. Americans built tanks like cars. By 1944, the United States was producing 43,248 aircraft annually. Germany, despite Albert Speer's organizational genius and increased production efforts, managed 35,350 machines. But here's the crucial difference. German production represented maximum effort using every available resource, skilled craftsman, and underground factory. American production was just getting started. The American automotive industry alone underwent complete transformation. Companies that had never built military equipment retooled entire factories in months. General Motors dedicated 95% of its manufacturing capacity to military equipment. Buick, which made luxury cars, produced 74,000 radial engines for B-24 bombers, 2,000 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, 600 M39 tanks, 19,000 powertrains, and 2 million cartridge cases. This wasn't precision engineering, this was industrial steamroller, and it was built on the same philosophy as those prefabricated barracks: standardization, mass production, speed over perfection. German prisoners began hearing numbers that seemed fictional. American factories produced 2,665,196 vehicles of all types for military use by war's end. Not tanks, vehicles, trucks, jeeps, ambulances, mobile workshops, the logistical backbone that kept armies mobile. If it had wheels, Detroit industrialists manufactured it, and they manufactured it using techniques Germans considered crude: assembly lines, interchangeable parts, unskilled labor, the same methods that built those 700 series barracks. The psychological impact on German prisoners varied. Hardcore Nazis dismissed it as impossible, American lies. But pragmatic soldiers, especially those with technical backgrounds, recognized what they were witnessing: a fundamental difference in industrial philosophy that their leadership had catastrophically misjudged. German military doctrine emphasized quality, superior engineering. A Tiger tank could defeat 4 Sherman tanks in direct combat. Therefore, German reasoning went, 1 Tiger equaled 4 Shermans. But Americans didn't send 4 Shermans, they sent 20, and they built them in a quarter of the time. The same logic applied to everything. German concrete U-boat pens with 15-foot thick walls. Incredible engineering, virtually indestructible. But they took years to build and required massive resources. American prefabricated structures, erected in days. Destroyed? Build another in a week. Some German officers began understanding too late what this meant. They'd been fighting an engineering war. America was fighting a production war, and production was winning. By late 1944, even the most dedicated Nazi prisoners couldn't ignore reality. American camps showed them films of concentration camp liberations. Many prisoners expressed shock, anger, disbelief. But they also saw something else in those films: the scale of American military operations. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The equipment, the supplies, the infrastructure. After viewing one atrocity film, 1,000 prisoners at Camp Butner, North Carolina, burned their German uniforms, not just because of the horror they'd witnessed, but because they understood the war was lost, had been lost the moment American industrial capacity engaged. The numbers told the story German leadership had refused to believe. In 1938, before the war began, American national income nearly doubled the combined income of Germany, Japan, and Italy. Americans produced more steel than Germany and mined almost double the coal. During a depression, Roosevelt's Arsenal of Democracy speech in December 1940 wasn't a promise. It was a warning. Americans would use their immense industrial capacity to build weapons of war for every democracy threatened by fascism. German leadership dismissed it as American bombast. By war's end, US industry alone outproduced all Axis countries combined. Not by a small margin. American trucks, tanks, and aircraft supplied not just American forces but British armies and the Soviet Red Army. The Soviets, fighting the bulk of German forces on the Eastern Front, did so using American-supplied vehicles, food, and raw materials shipped across 2 oceans. The prefabricated buildings were merely the visible symptom of something larger, a fundamental industrial philosophy that prioritized function over form, speed over perfection, production over craftsmanship. Germans built fortifications to last 1,000 years. Americans built barracks to last 5 years and solve today's problem. And it worked. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, German prisoners faced repatriation to a nation in ruins. Many would spend additional years in British and French camps helping rebuild war-damaged Europe before finally returning home. When they arrived, they found German cities destroyed. Industrial capacity shattered. Infrastructure collapsed. American cities were untouched. American factories were expanding. Those temporary military structures, still standing. In March 1985, 40 years after the war ended, nearly 24,000 World War II temporary buildings remained in use by the US military. Structures designed to last 5 years, serving for 4 decades. The aftermath brought a peculiar twist. Starting in 1945, the US government sold surplus military buildings to veterans and civilians, complete 700 series barracks available for $600 to $1,000, a fraction of conventional construction costs. Thousands of veterans purchased these prefabricated structures. They became homes, churches, schools, businesses, storage facilities, farm buildings. The Midwest filled with former military barracks converted to grain storage. Rural communities used them as community centers. Universities housed returning GI Bill students in them. Some communities built entire neighborhoods from surplus military structures. Roger Young Village in Los Angeles housed 750 families in converted barracks. Vetville developments appeared near universities. These weren't luxurious homes, but they were weathertight, cheap, and available immediately when America faced a severe housing shortage. Churches discovered these structures solved expansion problems elegantly. A growing congregation could purchase a surplus barracks for a few $1,000s, position it beside existing buildings, and instantly gain assembly space. Some congregations used them for decades before eventually replacing them with traditional construction. The architectural legacy proved more lasting than anyone expected. These temporary structures demonstrated that Americans would accept non-traditional building forms if they were functional and affordable. The mobile home industry borrowed lessons directly from military prefabrication, standardized components, factory assembly, highway transportability. Modern pre-engineered metal buildings used for warehouses and retail stores descend directly from these wartime principles. Self-supporting structures, bolt-together assembly, elimination of skilled labor requirements. The philosophy that Germans had mocked became standard American construction practice, but perhaps the most profound legacy lived in the minds of those who'd witnessed it. German prisoners who returned home after the war carried with them an understanding of what American industrial capacity actually meant. Some chose to return to America permanently. They'd seen the abundance, the efficiency, the sheer scale of production. Oscar Wagner, a prisoner at the Eaton, Indiana camp, returned to the United States after repatriation and lived in Delaware County for decades. He participated in community activities. Died in 2014 at age 97. He told an interviewer when he was 92, "I've never felt so grateful as I do now." The German military establishment had laughed at American prefabricated buildings, dismissed them as evidence of industrial inferiority, viewed them through a lens of Prussian engineering superiority that valued permanent construction and precision craftsmanship. They failed to understand that those prefabricated buildings represented something far more dangerous than poor engineering. They represented a fundamental industrial philosophy that could mobilize and deploy resources at unprecedented speed and scale. A system that prioritized solving immediate problems over building monuments to engineering excellence. The temporary structures were never about building quality, they were about building capacity. And capacity, it turned out, wins wars. By 1945, 2 million American troops were housed in structures that German planners had considered laughable. Those troops were equipped with weapons, vehicles, and supplies produced by the same mass production mentality. They were supported by a logistics network that stretched across 2 oceans and supplied 3 continents. The Germans had built the Atlantic Wall, a massive fortification stretching from Norway to France, 650,000 cubic yards of concrete, 15-foot thick walls, a monument to engineering excellence. Americans breached it in hours during D-Day because they'd spent their resources building landing craft, prefabricated harbors, and the logistical capacity to supply millions of soldiers. The contrast crystallized everything. Germans built fortifications to withstand centuries. Americans built structures to win the war. One philosophy created engineering marvels. The other created victory. The final accounting told the story. 170,000 Quonset huts alone, a more sophisticated, prefabricated design developed during the war. Millions of square feet of additional temporary construction. Housing for 16 million service members built in under 5 years. An industrial mobilization that transformed American factories from consumer goods to war materiel in months. And it all started with something German military planners considered primitive. Prefabricated wooden buildings assembled by unskilled labor following illustrated instructions. Structures that wouldn't impress any engineer but could house an entire army while German craftsmen were still mixing concrete. The lesson wasn't about engineering excellence versus industrial efficiency. It was about understanding what actually matters when you're trying to win a war. Perfect structures built slowly, or adequate structures built fast enough to house millions of soldiers. German military philosophers chose perfect. Americans chose fast. History records which philosophy won. Those prefabricated buildings, mocked and dismissed, outlasted the 1,000-year Reich by decades. Some are still standing today, 80 years later, converted to other uses, serving new purposes. A lasting monument to the philosophy that temporary solutions, deployed at massive scale with incredible speed, can defeat permanent fortifications built with precision engineering. The Germans laughed at American prefab buildings. Then those buildings housed the 2 million troops who accepted Germany's unconditional surrender. The temporary structures had proven more permanent than German military superiority. That's the irony that German prisoners carried home. They'd mocked American industrial methods as crude and simplistic. They'd believed in engineering excellence and precision craftsmanship. They'd been taught that quality always defeats quantity. They learned, too late, that quantity produced fast enough becomes its own quality, and that sometimes the best engineering solution isn't the most impressive one. It's the one that works, right now, at the scale you need. American prefabricated buildings didn't need to last 1,000 years. They just needed to last long enough to win the war. And they did. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.